It's time for Tab Talks, your weekly conversation about matters of faith. I'm your host, Jennifer Rash.
And I'm your co-host, Debbie Campbell.
And I'm your guest co-host, Margaret Colson.
Welcome, Margaret. We're glad you're with us today.
Thank you.
All right, we are talking with retired pastor and founder of Right from the Heart Ministries, Bryant Wright, who is the new president of Send Relief Compassion Ministries for Southern Baptist. Welcome, Bryant.
Sure glad to be with you folks today.
All right, well, we're going to get into Send Relief and your new role and all in just a minute, but I wanted to let Margaret have a couple of questions because she's got some secrets she's going to share.
Okay.
It's so good to see you, Brian. It's been way too long. But when I told my husband, Keith, that we would be visiting today, he said, well, I have a question. So it's actually an on the record, off the record question that I know you will have the right answer to.
Hope so.
Are we going to see any Gamecocks football this fall?
Well, as questionable as the team may be, it might be great to take the season off. We won't have any losses, but people in Alabama can't understand how difficult it is to be a Gamecock, because with all those national championships of Alabama and a few with Auburn, you just can't imagine what we have to live with. But the state motto in South Carolina is, while I breathe, I hope. So Gamecock fans who are loyal and fill that stadium, they are certainly the embodiment of that motto of the state. One day, maybe it will happen.
We have to believe.
That's right.
But you have to tell us why you know so much about the Gamecocks.
Well, Keith, Margaret's husband, has a strong association with the Gamecocks with all his football prowess. And I went there. My parents met there. And it's interesting that almost all of the Wright family is from Atlanta or the Georgia area, and yet about 23 have gone to the University of South Carolina. So there's a lot of family heritage there. I have kidded my parents, who started this emotion. Why didn't they pick Bama or Auburn, where we'd at least win occasionally?
Oh, no.
And as I recall, your younger sister Alice was a cheerleader when my husband played, and actually married one of his teammates.
That's right, Stevie. They played at the same time under Coach Carlin. They had some good teams. Coach Carlin and Coach Spurrier definitely helped us to have a little respite from those years of mediocrity there.
I love it. Well, Margaret also sat under you as the pastor of Johnson Ferry Baptist Church for years, right? Connection there.
Absolutely. Margaret, when did y'all come into Johnson Ferry?
It has been about 5 years. When we moved to East Cobb, we lived right across the street from the church, and we had long admired the church and its varied ministries, particularly its international missions emphasis. And we just knew that that was the place God wanted us to be when we got a little bit closer to the church building. And it has been a wonderful experience for us.
Well, that's great. I know Keith is one of our key adult Bible teachers, and no doubt the Great Commission has just been central to Johnson Ferry. It was a privilege to pastor a church that really embraced Christ's Great Commission in a big way. I'm very thankful for that.
When I heard that you had been named to lead Send Relief, I just knew that was the perfect segue for you to continue your international missions commitment and love and passion on an even bigger stage, if you will. So it just seemed like a natural fit for you.
Well, thank you, Margaret. I really had no plans to retire from ministry when I was sure the Lord was leading me to hand off Johnson Ferry to a younger man to pastor and lead the church in reaching a new generation. That's been clear, and I've had a real peace of mind about that. But I also knew the Lord was going to continue to hopefully use my life in some way in ministry. So doing it with the international and national missions component is really a joy, really is.
Well, that's a good segue to get us into the Send Relief effort. Okay, so to backtrack a little, about mid-February, the International Mission Board and North American Mission Board announced a new collaborative effort that they were going to work together with a compassion ministry that would be called Send Relief. And with that came a new position, which is so the first president, the first group in this point, and then of course you were named about 2 weeks later
That's
as
right.
president of Sin Relief, and then the world shut down. So, and so we are a little behind on chatting about all of this, but help us understand, first of all, exactly how Sin Relief itself is going to work, and then what that means for your position.
Well, it is really historic in that this is the first time that the International Mission Board and the North American Mission Board have joined together to begin a new ministry together. Now, both of them, Sin Relief was a name already associated with NAM, known more for helping with disaster relief probably than any other area, although there's been much more to it than that. But because the name so fits what we're going to be doing in Compassion Ministries, both internationally and nationally, just felt that was a good name to go with. The International Mission Board has had a separate nonprofit ministry that they have been associated with called Baptist Global Response. They've done a tremendous work for about 15 years now. And when Jeff Palmer, who was the founding leader of that, felt led to retire, that was when Paul Chitwood, the president of IMB, reached out to me about following Jeff Palmer, but having a little more high profile, out preaching in the churches, out kind of carrying the banner of this ministry in a more public way. And then as we continue to talk, I just asked him if they'd ever considered doing this together with NAM so that pastors would know there's kind of a one-stop shop they could go to when it comes to compassion and mercy and human needs types of ministry. And he said they had talked about it, but just hadn't really acted on it. So he and Kevin Ezell began to talk, and the rest is history. They came together to do something that's never been done before. So I think the potential is really incredible as Southern Baptist Christians join together in having this worldwide focus, because these needs will never stop. And the love of Christ, when you're presenting the love of Christ by meeting tangible needs in people's lives, that's just a wonderful combination.
Well, Bryant, on that note, I had noticed the timing on this too, that just as the partnership began between the North American Mission Board and the International Mission Board and this global ministry, the pandemic began to emerge.
Yeah.
In what ways do you see the providence of God in bringing these two separate entities together in this global compassion ministry?
Well, Margaret, it's a great question, and God's timing is always perfect. This is certainly no surprise to him. So I think in leading Paul and Kevin and then myself to join together in this, I just trust this is God's perfect timing. Now, to begin in what has been the BGR offices in Nashville in mid-March, and then 3 days later, the IMB asked them to close those offices and people work from home, and IMB shut down. I was driving back to Atlanta from Nashville. I thought, well, I'll just work out of the NAM offices, and I got a call that they were shutting down the NAM offices through the month of April, and it wound up being through the month of May. So it has been quite a beginning. And for a guy who never used a computer, I feel like I've spent my last 3 months on calls like this as we're bringing this ministry together. So that's been quite a challenge, a steep learning curve for me.
See, that's why our interview needed to be a few months later, so that you were
Yeah.
ready, right?
Even though, as you know, I had a hard time getting on this call.
Bryant, what are some of the areas of focus for Sin Relief? Because a lot of people out there may want to know. They think of disaster relief, but I know you said it's a lot more.
And thank you for asking that question, Debbie, because I have learned from the beginning of these discussions aspects I was not aware of. But some of this has been clear with NAM and what they've been doing, some with IMB. So there are really several pillars I'd like to mention. What's best known is crisis response, whether it's storm response. I think that's just where people associate the ministry. But then there's dealing with areas of extreme poverty, what's called community development. That could be everything from digging a well in a remote village to help them be self-sufficient in a water supply, to what we feel with the COVID situation. There's already been about $1.3 million that have been sent out in over 200 projects on the international area that have been mostly food relief kind of projects. And our guess is, and we're thinking this fall, kind of as an end result of COVID, well, of course, who knows when COVID's going to be over, but in light of this prolonged issue, that hunger issues in third world areas are going to be huge. And so that's going to be a major focus, but it's called community development and thinking about how villages and areas can be enriched through the help of our IMB missionaries using these compassion type projects to really build up a community. There's also a third area, and that's human trafficking is such a massive worldwide problem. The sex trafficking is modern day slavery, and that has been already been a dimension of sin relief that most people don't know about. That really, that was something I learned and was not aware of. And that's it's so on the heart of so many millennials, especially today, that I hope we can get the word out that this is a ministry, a vehicle that people can be a part of to bring relief there. And I've already been to one of the centers in Vegas that one of the churches there that is kind of a champion for that ministry in that area through the North American Mission Board and Sin Relief. It breaks your heart to think about what happens there, but it's sure encouraging to see lives literally rescued out of a bondage there. Then there's a fourth area, and that's working with refugees and displaced people. The refugees are best known out of the Syrian civil war, but it's mega millions. I think it's now over 70 million refugees worldwide that are displaced people because of wars and just unlivable situations. And what amazes me, Debbie, is in Muslim areas with refugees, how open they are to the good news of Christ, because they're so sick of the hatred and the violence in Islam. And it's really amazing. Ann and I have been in those tents on the border of Syria and Lebanon and Jordan. And their openness to the gospel is incredibly encouraging. It really is. I think people would be dumbfounded at how those people are searching. They can't work. Their kids can't go to school. It's just really a difficult situation. So that's been on Ann's, my wife's, and my heart for several years since we've been there a couple of times, and thankful that Sin Relief can address that. But also there's another area, the fifth area is at-risk women and children. That's everything from widows, abused women to orphans. It embraces parts of adoption and foster care, but in the international area, it's interesting that the words adoption and orphanages are often seen with suspicion by those nations as Americans are coming to steal their children. I know that seems bizarre when the whole motive is to help the children, but the wording here was carefully, we were carefully working on that, just talk about at-risk women and children, so that it's not the threat there as some other governments would hear this, that when you use the terms adoption and orphanage, it's just, they're wondering what your motives are. So those are really the five major areas. And I think the big challenge we've got is, how do you have the elevator conversation when somebody asks you about sin relief that you've never seen before and explain it in about 30 seconds? That's a big challenge that we're working on to try to bring that down and then expand, if they're interested, to those five major areas we can talk about. So a long answer there, but I hope that gives some clarity to your viewers and listeners.
You are listening to Tab Talks. I'm your host, Jennifer Rash, with co-host Debbie Campbell and Margaret Colson from the Tab team. We are talking with Bryant Wright, the new and first president of Sin Relief Compassion Ministries for Southern Baptists. Bryant, we were talking earlier about how you bring from your pastoral role and your longtime interest and passion in international missions and missions in general to this new position. How will you speak to the pastors of the churches across the nation about how to be involved?
Well, there are really three major ways. Can never underestimate the power of prayer. Secondly, cannot underestimate the importance of giving to Sin Relief, and people can go to sinrelief.org to see different ways that they can give. And then the third is just volunteers to go to work with the missionaries and the ministry partners that are on the ground. I really hope that we're going to see a groundswell of volunteers taking part in these compassion ministries all around the world. Most people know Samaritan's Purse, which is a fabulous ministry, had a tremendous impact. And that's probably the best comparison for people to understand what Sin Relief is about. But the big difference is Samaritan's Purse is usually in during the crisis, and then they are out in the sense of going to the next crisis. Whereas we are working with ministries and partners in ministry on the ground that stay and are seeking to have a long-term involvement in ministry with the gospel of Christ in that community. So that's probably the big difference. So you're bringing together the work of ministries that are already in place, but when needs arise, calling on Sin Relief to help them with ministry projects to win the right to be heard, to share the gospel of Christ.
Bryant,
Yeah.
in what ways do you see being involved in compassion ministries impacting the lives of those who are serving as much as those who are being served by the ministries?
Well, Margaret, I think the best example I can give is Pastor in Johnson Ferry, because as people began to go on mission trips, literally by the thousands, it is you've been in Johnson Ferry, the impact that has spiritually on the church. Because so many of these partnerships involve compassion ministries. It wasn't always that we set out to have that be the intentional reason, but it just encompasses that. Because I think Sin Relief really, to me, the best way to describe it is biblically, is we are living out the Great Commandment to fulfill the Great Commission. And the two can't be separated. So I think what happens is when volunteers go, they leave a part of their heart with the people group that they've been serving. And that changes people dramatically in their outlook about sharing the love of Christ around the world.
Right, that brings to my mind, people listening and watching may say, well, I want to volunteer. Do they need special training of any sort?
Well, Debbie, it will depend where they're going. I mean, there's going to be training involved, and I wish I could give more specifics of the training. There is already training available through what IMB and NAM have been doing in their particular ministries, but that is a big part of what we're working on during this time as we're going through COVID and we're having all these Zoom calls, is the development of training, because no doubt on short-term mission trips, a lot of well-intentioned American Christians have made a fool of themselves, or they haven't been culturally sensitive enough, and then they leave a mess for the missionaries or the long-term ministry partners on the ground. And we certainly want to minimize that. I know some of that is going to happen dealing with human beings, but we certainly hope that there'll be adequate training. But it's not going to be the kind of comprehensive training that they have to work at 6 months before they can do anything like that. It will be pretty simple, several hours of training, usually with the group that they would be going with from their local church. But we're really working on that now.
Good.
Okay, so the International Mission Board serves obviously internationally, and the North American Mission Board serves across the United States and Canada. So how does your role in bringing these together, tell us behind the scenes, how does all this work, and where do you fit, and how do you connect the dots?
All right, well, for about March through all of May, we had subcommittees of the IMB, of Baptist Global Response, and NAM working together to just identify all the things we need to do to bring this together. And now in the month of June of 2020, we are beginning to build the staff of people that are going to be serving in very specific roles with Sin Relief. So that's our major focus right now, and is going to be our major focus throughout the summer. Because obviously, since the BGR offices have been in Nashville and we're bringing all this together in North Atlanta, there's been a tremendous focus in that regard. Was there something else you wanted me to cover on that particular question?
I guess maybe how will you relate then to
Okay.
each of the boards and communicate in general?
Well, good question. And the basic way that I'll be leading is through a vice president of national that will be a NAM employee, and a vice president of international that'll be an IMB employee. And y'all get have this picture. Kevin Ezell is so great at communication through illustration and pictures. And his picture is a bow tie. And he and Paul Chitwood are the top corners of the bow tie, and the two VPs of national and international are the bottom corners, and I'm the knot in the middle.
I love it. I love it.
And I've just told those guys, that sounds like I'm going to easily be choked here if y'all not careful on this process. So
I can pull really tightly.
yeah, pull too tight on all this. But I love both Kevin and Paul, and excited about working with the two VPs. And really, they will be running their ministries day to day. I'll be leading them and we'll be working together as a team, but I'll be out more in the churches, hopefully in the seminaries and the colleges, just speaking wherever I can, as well as meeting with potential donors for sin relief. But they will be doing the nuts and bolts, leading their particular staffs day in and day out. So I hope that maybe gives a little better idea of what you're asking.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Recently, one of our Southern Baptist leaders named Sandy Wisdom Martin, who's the National Executive Director for the WMU, described this season that we're in with COVID-19 as a sacred season. In what ways do you think that Southern Baptists can affirm this point in history, as difficult as it is, and really see through the difficulties opportunities to minister and witness?
Well, I think that's a very distinctly Christian view to call it a sacred season, because I think probably a lot of us have been complaining a lot about the limitations we have and how tired we are of COVID. And now with the racial strife in our land amidst economic difficulties and recovery, it's a difficult time. But I think because God knew all this was going to go on, we as Christians have an opportunity to be a light for Christ in the midst of a lot of uncertainty that people are going through during this time. And Margaret, as pastor, as you are able to enter into people's lives when they're going through a personal crisis, I call that holy ground. People share things with their pastor in those crises that just it's sacred. It really is a sacred trust that occurs there. And that's why I call it holy ground. It's a deeply personal moment where they can encounter God in a richer way than ever before. And I think worldwide with COVID, this can be sacred ground, definitely for the Christian. And we hope by sharing the good news of Christ, it becomes sacred for others that are just plain bewildered right now and uncertain about what's going on.
Thank you.
Bryant, there was one thing I read, and it was from the Heart Ministries, I believe. That's something we'd like to hear from you about, because you had a newsletter that I read, and the key word in there was hope.
Yeah.
Which actually I was able to share with somebody today. So I was glad I had read it, because this person, like you said, was very depressed and down. But could you tell us a little bit about that ministry?
Well, it's a ministry I began about 25 years ago. And what's unique about it, it's different from most Christian media ministries, is that we don't do anything on Christian radio unless they want to provide our spots for free. We do 30-second spots on secular TV and 60-second spots on secular radio. And it gives us a chance to speak to folks outside the walls of the church. At the same time, the Christian community is usually encouraged by that, because they may be riding in the car on the way to work, listening to the number one station in Atlanta, and all of a sudden a word about the gospel comes on in a way that they can apply to their everyday life and even talk to the person they're riding with that may not be a follower of Christ. So it's been fun to do the ministry. And then the internet was invented after Right from the Heart. And now we do so much more on social media through daily devotions, and it allows the ministry to expand really worldwide now. So I've really enjoyed doing that. I did it all the time I was pastor in Johnson Ferry. And when I talked to Paul and Kevin about this role, I said, sure, would like to continue Right from the Heart, because it's really a fun way to get the good news out in an unexpected way. When somebody's seeing a spot on TV that lasts 30 seconds, they don't even have time to change the channel. And they've heard about Jesus just that quickly. So that's pretty exciting to do that.
That's good.
And you write on it as well, right? You have blogs.
We now have a podcast. My son George is a pastor at Shandon Baptist in Columbia, and it was really his idea that we begin this podcast. He's kind of driving it and does a great job. And it's been a lot of fun to do that with my son. They come out about every 2 weeks. So you can pull that up on rfth.org or rightfromtheheart.org for podcasts or spots, some of the radio spots and devotions. You can get daily devotions on your email or to show up on Twitter every morning. If you just sign up, it's completely free.
Oh,
There are
fantastic.
so many ways to communicate the gospel today that we have never enjoyed before. And what a wonderful opportunity to share the good news with those who wouldn't hear it otherwise.
That's right. I know, Margaret, that God has chuckled that a guy who's never used a computer, who knows nothing about technology, leads a media ministry. And now the first 3 months of Sin Relief, I've just been living on a computer. So it's got to make God chuckle.
That's right.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything about that, but I knew your background.
That's funny. Well, how can we find out more about Sin Relief?
Well, you can go to sinrelief.org and you can read about Sin Relief and know that it is a ministry that's unfolding. So as people go to that now, there's going to be a whole lot more that's coming. But our major focus right now is building the staff. And because the fiscal year ends September 30th, we hope to have everything in place, staff-wise, what we're going to be doing in Sin Relief by that time. So if there's more they'd like to know from even what they've heard today, just be patient. We're working on it. We're a work in progress.
Fantastic. We'll have to get you back in a few months and get the updates. So
That sounds great. That'd be good.
thank you. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate
Glad to
it.
be with you.
All right. And thank you all for listening. We'll be back next week.